Okay, so why don't we get started? First of all, welcome to everyone. It's after a nice long weekend and a very busy Tuesday. We're very happy to welcome everybody. Okay, so why don't we get started? One sec. First of all, I have to turn, just turning off our YouTube live channel there. Just bear with me here. We'll go back live again. So we've got just a few housekeeping items, and I'll turn it over to the rest of the cast that you see here. Obviously, we've got Galit Baram, Consul General of Israel, who we're very pleased to welcome tonight. Dr. David Urbach, our incoming president. Cantor Alex Stein, who serves many purposes at Adith Israel, but tonight he will be our moderator. And behind the scenes is Sarah McGoldrick, our social media coordinator. And she'll be doing a lot of the work behind the scenes to keep everything together tonight. As far as other housekeeping items, probably the most important thing is we've all heard of Zoom bombing. And I know the message gets tired, but we know that events like this can be Zoom bombed. We've tried to set up as much security as possible to prevent that. If in fact we do get Zoom bombed, what we would ask everyone to do is hold still. We'll try to find the culprit and kick that person out, and we'll resume. If we can't, we're going to end this session if it happens, and we'll send out a new link immediately. We don't expect it to happen, so we'll pray that everything works out and we can just go through this without getting any infiltration. And with that, I'm going to ask Sarah and myself will turn off our video, and we're going to turn it over to Dr. David Urbach, our new president. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Phil. Hello, everybody. It's an honor for me to become the president of Adith Israel. I will note this is my first official act as president. This has been a very difficult time for everybody as COVID has turned all of our lives upside down. And I do want to remind everybody, please know that the synagogue, the clergy, the staff, and the lay leadership are all here for you. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you are in need or we can provide any assistance. One of the ways we can all support each other is by building community. And a good way to sustain and build our community is through events just like this. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce tonight's speaker. Consul General Galit Baram joined the Israeli Foreign Service in 1994. Her service abroad included postings in Moscow, Cairo, and Washington, D.C. She also served as director of the Department for Palestinian Affairs and Regional Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Jerusalem. Ms. Baram took up her current position as Consul General of Israel in Toronto and Western Canada in August 2016. She is married to a fellow diplomat and she has 2 children. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce her, and we welcome you to Adith Israel.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me at Adith Israel. This is actually, I don't know if you're aware of it, but this is my neighborhood synagogue just around the corner. And it's always a pleasure when you invite me to participate, to attend Shabbat services or to meet you all on Zoom. We live in interesting times, so we will have to make the best of this tool of Zoom meetings, Zoom conferences. I'll tell you a little bit. I prefer to dedicate my words, first of all, to what is happening at the consulate and the activity evolving or revolving around the coronavirus pandemic. And then we'll talk a little bit about the situation in Israel and in the region. And then pretty much we'll open it up to questions and answers. The Q&A session is the part that I enjoy the most. So please be very Israeli, very direct about it. If there is anything particular that interests you, don't hesitate and don't choose your words too carefully. We're in the family, we're within the family, and everything is on the table. And it's a good opportunity to discuss issues that are close to your heart. About 2 months ago, our work changed dramatically at the Israeli mission here in Toronto and Western Canada. I don't know if you're aware of it, but we're considered one of the busiest diplomatic missions in the world among consulates and embassies alike. And we work pretty much around the clock. There are many engagements. The calendar is very busy. And then 2 months ago, things changed dramatically for us, and we had to adapt ourselves to an entirely new work regime that influenced our everyday work. First of all, and it doesn't come as news to you, we work in shifts, and the consulate is not open for the general public anymore. It doesn't mean that we don't continue providing services as usual. The consulate in Toronto and Western Canada covers a vast area, a vast part of the country. In addition to the 5 provinces all the way from Ontario to British Columbia, we also cover Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. As if it's not enough, it's a small mission that does a lot of work. And when it comes to consular services, per se, we have a lot of experience in providing services over the phone and via mail and email, but we never worked like that in Toronto. People used to schedule an appointment, come to the consulate, receive services. Things were done relatively easily and quickly and efficiently. And now we have to adopt a new work regime, and it's not easy. It's been very challenging for the diplomatic team. It's been challenging for the consular, administrative, and security teams alike. I'll just give you an example. A couple of months ago, when the coronavirus pandemic started, there were hundreds and hundreds of Israeli backpackers who were stranded all over the world, many of them in Latin America. And you are aware of this phenomenon when young Israelis, men and women, finish their military service and they want to travel the world. They save some money and they go backpacking in India and in Nepal and Thailand, and very large numbers, they go to Latin America as well. So all of a sudden, all these Israelis were stranded with flights being canceled from a minute to minute. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was actually the one who took that responsibility to bring them all back home. With the support, of course, of the business sector, of some companies, and El Al, the Israeli airliner El Al, that organized quite a few flights from Latin America and from India. But the fact is that many of them were left behind, and they were looking for ways to return to Israel. There were other routes that those backpackers were looking into, and one of the options was Pearson Airport in Toronto. Pearson Airport has become quite a hub when it comes to our work, and it's an international airport. It's still functioning, it's working, unlike many other airports around the world. And when it comes to providing services, when it comes to negotiating the terms that allow Israeli backpackers and Israeli citizens to enter Canada, to stay, or to go through transit and continue to other destinations. Now with the coronavirus pandemic, all these regular rules and regulations have to be negotiated and agreed between governments. So definitely that we were involved in that, and we assisted quite a few Israelis in making their way back to Israel. One case that I would like to mention, and this really touched me personally, almost personally, was a young couple on their honeymoon who were stranded in the Caribbean, and they were left with hardly any flights out of that little island in the Caribbean, no money, only their documents and the minimal money that allowed them to travel to the next destination, and that happened to be Toronto. And we helped them out of that Caribbean island state, and we helped them on their way back to Israel. Another example that was very interesting was an entire set of a television program, one of these survival VIP reality TV. The entire crew was stranded in Brazil, and with close coordination between the consulate in Toronto and our consulate in Sao Paulo, we brought them to Toronto, and from Toronto they continued back to Israel. So these are two cases, but there are many, many other cases that we had to deal with when it comes to families, when it comes to students, Canadian students who study in Israel and who would like to return to Israel to continue with their studies. Very fascinating cases of weddings and the family reunions and the bar mitzvahs that had to be celebrated in long distance and on Zoom. And all these aspects, these very personal stories of so many people, Israelis here in Canada, Canadians back in Israel, were assisted and helped by the Situation Room at the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and by the consulate here in Toronto. I could elaborate on that as well. Another aspect of our activity is the fact, again, that Pearson Airport functions as a hub and helps us bring equipment, personal protective gear from Israel to Canada, and through our consulate here in Toronto, channel it and send it to many diplomatic missions, Israeli diplomatic missions in other destinations. It's a very intricate work of coordination between governments, between authorities, and what we receive here is being sent not only to diplomatic missions in North America, in the United States and in Canada, but also to Israeli missions in the former Soviet Union and some even African countries, and everything is conducted from here and led by our consul, Asaf Bracha, a remarkable guy, an excellent diplomat, and I will be very sorry to see him go soon. He's finishing 5 years about a month from now, and well, God willing, if the flights are renewed, he'll take his family and return to Jerusalem, to Israel. So this is one aspect of our activity that has to do more with consular, with administrative services. When it comes to our diplomatic work, political work, outreach to different target audiences, we had to entirely change the concept and rely heavily on social media, on Zoom, on webinars, and the regular activity on our social media channels. And if you haven't done it this far, I really encourage you to follow us on social media. We are Israel in Toronto on Facebook, on Twitter, and Instagram, and our activity. We get many compliments about our activity on social media. I encourage you to follow us because all our activity is spread there. It's provided. The information is out there, and this has become the major tool, the most important tool of our diplomatic activity these days. Just to mention a couple of events that were organized. A congratulation in 3 languages, English, Arabic, and Hebrew. Congratulations on the beginning of the holy month of Ramadan. We sent that, we posted it on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we received a very impressive coverage from not only from Canada, but from Muslim communities from all over the world who were touched and moved. Of course, there were some who criticized Israel, and it doesn't matter what we do and how much we try to reach out. But for many other Muslims in Canada and in other parts of the world, it was heartwarming, and they really received it with gratitude. And we were happy that we contributed our share to building bridges this way. It's important to note that in times like that, when celebrations on Pesach and Easter and Ramadan are so limited in Israel and are so minimal, not only in Israel, but in other parts of the world as well, it's important at least to show activity and to make an effort with the tools that we have on social media. That was one aspect. Another activity that we organized had to do with Yom HaZikaron, with the Israel Memorial Day. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but on Memorial Day, we organized a very big event here that is held in one of the synagogues in Toronto that attracts more than 1,000 participants, usually 1,200 to 1,500 Israelis and members of the Jewish community. Israeli Day of Remembrance is a sacred day for Israelis who live here. In addition to the regular activity that we lead on Yom HaZikaron, we also support about 100 bereaved families, Israeli bereaved families who live in Canada, all over Canada, as well as wounded soldiers who are supported by the IDF and by the Ministry of Defense in Israel. It is the consulate in Toronto that provides services and maintains contacts with these families and with these wounded soldiers. So on Yom HaZikaron, there is an expectation that there will be some sort of recognition, a ceremony, an event. And this year we were unable to organize such an event, but we pre-recorded, and posted a program, a memorial service on YouTube, and shared it again on social media. A very moving ceremony, and I have to tell you, I'm always grateful to the community, to members of this community, Israelis and Canadian Jews, that when we reach out to people, when we ask them to volunteer and to contribute to such ceremonies, people immediately agree and participate and gladly take part in an event that is so emotional for so many Israelis. So the ceremony, again, the link is on our social media, and the ceremony was beautiful. And again, many compliments poured in from bereaved families, from wounded soldiers, from members of the Israeli community, members of the Jewish community, who felt that we somehow managed to solve and deal with the challenges of the coronavirus pandemic. On Yom Ha'atzmaut, Independence Day, I encourage you to check our social media channels. Again, there are clips there are links to a video clip that includes congratulations from Canadian elected officials from all over the country, congratulating Israel on its 72nd Independence Day. This video clip was created by the 3 diplomatic missions here in Canada, by the consulate in Toronto, the consulate in Montreal, and the embassy in Ottawa. And it's really heartwarming to see Canadian elected officials all the way from Nova Scotia to British Columbia speak about Israel and about their own personal connection to Israel on the federal level, on the provincial level, on the municipal level, and not to mention the many representatives of Jewish organizations, heads of federations from all over the country that joined together in order to congratulate Israel on its Independence Day. So definitely social media is becoming a very important tool diplomatically. I have to tell you that as a person who was educated on classic diplomacy, I still prefer in-person meetings, conversations face to face. This is the essence, this is the life of diplomacy. But we live in changing conditions, work conditions, and we have to adapt. And one of the most useful tools is indeed public diplomacy. A few words about the diplomatic and the political situation in Israel and about the region, and then I'll open it to questions and answers. We functioned, as you very well know, for a very long time without a government or with an interim government. For the state of Israel in general, and for governmental ministries in particular, it created many problems, many administrative problems. How do you function with hardly any budget, without the option, the ability to recruit new employees? And there are many issues that had to be discussed. But luckily now, at last, we have a government, a unity government that includes both Likud and Blue and White Party and other political parties. And the government was sworn in only recently, after a year and a half of, I would say, political instability, and 3 rounds of election. As you know, we voted, by the way, we diplomats, we get to vote abroad as well. And now I hope that this unity government will contribute to more stability in the political system in Israel. I believe we all need that. The challenges with the coronavirus pandemic are enormous when it comes to health, when it comes to education, and definitely when it comes to the economic recession that many Israelis experience here, as well as Canadians here in this country. A rising number of unemployed, of people who need to put bread on the table to provide for their families. And the government, this newly established government, will have more than enough to deal with. At the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, particularly, we've been through a very difficult period of time when it comes to the financial situation of the ministry, that I can say very openly here, crippled the foreign ministry and made our diplomatic work extremely difficult in many countries around the world, with no budget, no ability to recruit new employees. Now, when at last we have a foreign minister, a new foreign minister, Gabi Ashkenazi, I hope that he will lead the ministry in a new direction. And the most important thing is to make sure that the nominating committees of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will convene and will start appointing heads of mission and ambassadors to some of our most important diplomatic missions in the world. I would like to mention here that we still don't have a new ambassador here in Ottawa. We don't have an ambassador in Moscow. We need an ambassador in Cairo, in Paris. We need a consul general in Miami, and the list is long. Until now, everything was put pretty much on hold because of the political situation, and it's time to move forward, and to move forward very quickly. We need new people. There are diplomats who are returning to Israel this summer. There are new diplomats who are sent abroad, and all this will have to be resolved and relatively quickly. When it comes to the situation of the coronavirus pandemic in Israel, I guess that you've been following news from Israel, and you know that at first there was a lot of suspicion in the Israeli public when it came to the restrictions, to the health restrictions that were imposed and adopted by the Israeli government. For many Israelis, they saw them as almost, I would say, draconian restrictions. They were received with suspicion. They were considered unjustified in many cases. But as we saw, as the Israeli public saw, that more and more countries throughout the world adopt pretty much the same regulations and the same rules, then there was acceptance and willingness to deal with this situation. Children were kept at home until very recently. Businesses were closed. Only now we start adopting the initial steps of what is called the exit strategy, with the intention to renew education, renew the activity of the education system, and bring businesses back to life, because the crisis, the economic crisis, is looming, and we must find a solution for that. There is also in the Israeli public a certain level of fatigue. People are tired, people want to go back to normal. And this is why, despite the health regulations in Israel and restrictions, people go to the beaches, people go to parks, and they exercise outside, and they even started doing that before it was allowed, because what can I say? Israelis are Israelis, and we all need our space a little bit, especially these days. But I do believe that things are getting better in Israel despite the challenges, and hopefully this exit strategy will prove useful and efficient, and will allow more and more Israelis to enjoy this newly acquired freedom. When it comes to the region, there are a couple of subjects that dominate our agenda, and the most important thing, of course, is our relations with our Palestinian neighbors. We've been through ups and downs in our relations with the Palestinians, and the most important thing to remember during these days is that the coronavirus pandemic actually created an opportunity for both sides to cooperate in a positive manner. There is a lot of frustration on both sides. There is a lot of suspicion, disappointment, anger on the Israeli side, on the Palestinian side as well. We have to recognize it. But when it comes to the coronavirus pandemic, we see excellent cooperation between the two ministries of health, including workshops, including training programs, including the fact that Israel continues sending medications and medical equipment and protective gear to the Palestinian Authority and encourages other countries to do the same. We recognize that there is a humanitarian situation in Gaza, and we have to answer the needs of the population of the Palestinians in Gaza. The medical system, the health system in Gaza is I would say, practically starved, almost paralyzed because of the activity of Hamas, a terror organization, a proxy of Iran, financially and ideologically supported by Iran. And the fact that Hamas confiscates medical equipment and confiscates in general many of the deliveries that arrive from Israel, from other countries for its own purposes. In a situation like that, we believe that we have to put politics aside and provide support. Because of that, Israel allows 20,000 Palestinian workers to enter Israel every month, to continue working in Israel, despite the coronavirus pandemic and with all the risks involved. And by that, we indirectly help them provide for their families and in a way contribute our share to stabilizing the economy of the Palestinian Authority. Still, when it comes to Hamas, we are aware of the campaign. There is an ongoing campaign of Hamas, an attempt to put the blame on Israel when it comes to the coronavirus pandemic in the Palestinian Authority, describing it as if the Palestinians are in a critical condition and that Israel is pushing them into this situation on the level of almost, I would say, incitement. And we see a rise, especially around important dates such as Al-Quds Day, Jerusalem Day, and Nakba Day that we experienced only recently. And we are aware of the activity of pro-Palestinian organizations. We are aware of the activity of Hamas and other organizations. What we would like to see is the Palestinians continuing in this positive cooperation with Israel, exactly as they do between ministries of health when it comes to public health. This good cooperation could be renewed and applied to other fields. It's important for me to mention that when it comes to the UN, we get many compliments on this cooperation between Israel and the Palestinian authorities. The compliments come from the General Secretary of the UN, from the Special Envoy to the Middle East, and from other UN organizations and agencies when it comes to fighting to the coronavirus pandemic, and with the realization that in times like that we have to join forces and to try to find a solution and protect our population, our public, instead of fighting, instead of concentrating on incitement. Put politics aside and do what is necessary. This is the most important thing. Other regional issues, and I will end with that, is the fact that we've celebrated 2 years to the American decision to move their embassy to Jerusalem. The fact that Germany decided to outlaw Hezbollah, to designate this organization as a terror organization. And this is very important when it comes from a central and strong Western European country. Israel, the United States, Canada, and Australia already recognized Hezbollah as a terror organization. Now it comes from a European country, and I hope that the German decision will pave the road for other Western countries to follow. We've also hosted Secretary of State Pompeo in Israel. We continue our cooperation with the neighboring countries, mainly with Egypt and with Jordan, when it comes to providing water, when it comes to providing natural gas, and to discussing the situation in the region. But with all due respect, with many issues that are on the Israeli agenda nowadays, we have to realize that politically speaking, we don't necessarily interest the general community here and the general public in Canada. People tend to concentrate on everyday challenges here when it comes to the economic situation, when it comes to the future of Jewish education, survival of families here, health issues, and the conduct of the Canadian government and the federal, on the federal and the provincial levels as well. People are busy with everyday challenges. People are busy with the coronavirus pandemic, with their own health, and we respect it. We respect it. I believe that it's temporary. I believe that we do have to prepare for the coming days, because within a few weeks, a few months, the situation will improve, and the coronavirus pandemic will be behind us. And once we get to all this to this level, then I have a feeling that the usual subjects that are discussed in relation to Israel will return to the agenda and will dominate it again. What can I say? I wish all of you health. And I'm very glad that you managed to find the time and join us today. It's always a pleasure to meet members of the Jewish community and to discuss issues that interest the Jewish community here, and especially when it comes to Israel, a subject that naturally is close to my heart. I think I will end here, and I encourage you to ask anything that comes to mind.
Galit, thank you so much. I want to thank you so much for your time this evening. We really appreciate your insight, and we've been very, very fortunate at the Adath Israel to have an incredible relationship with your office, and we really appreciate your in-depth knowledge. So I want to get started with some Q&A. My first question to you is, Israeli biotech firms are part of the global effort to find treatments and a vaccine for COVID-19. There's a drug company in Haifa, Pluristem, that is looking at therapy and treatment as well. So I'm just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about Israel's contribution to this global effort.
Well, first of all, after we established this excellent cooperation with the Palestinian Authority, we attracted positively the attention of the UN, and I think this is a very good opportunity for us. There is a lot of activity that is conducted through different agencies in the UN that usually people don't know about. The tendency is to concentrate on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But Israel has a lot to contribute when it comes to water management, when it comes to the development of small and medium-sized businesses, health, and so on. Israel is a partner of the global effort against the coronavirus pandemic. We contributed $60 million in the framework of this global effort. And the most important thing is to support countries that are faced with the challenges and difficulties in fighting the coronavirus pandemic and protecting their own populations. I would say that the forte of Israel is our biomed sector, biotech, and high tech in general. And when it comes to the development of a vaccine or treatment for the coronavirus pandemic, there is already an international competition a race for the vaccine. Israeli companies are involved in that, and there were statements that were made by Israeli companies that are working very hard in finding a vaccine. We have some hard competition here in Canada and in the United States as well. But when it comes to developing a vaccine, it doesn't matter who wins. You mentioned one company, there are other companies, Israeli universities are involved in that. The government actually supports this initiative because of the realization that it's not enough to treat symptoms of the coronavirus pandemic. We have to eradicate it. We have to fight the virus. There are many Israeli companies that are involved in that, in cooperation with the government and with the academic sector in Israel.
Thank you. And let me ask you, Israel seems to be very successful at managing the COVID crisis, even to the point that now they're pretty much opening the whole country. I'm curious to know what's your thoughts of the secret of Israel's success to this?
Frankly, I don't know what to tell you, Alex. It's a very tough question because we hate to when it comes to obeying rules, when we're not the most ruly people in the world. You know that very well. And when it comes to regulations, at first there were many suspicions about it in Israel. Dissatisfaction, people didn't hide it. They didn't understand why all this mess was necessary, why they were trapped in their own houses with their children, and they thought it was absolutely unnecessary. At a certain point, Israelis complained that it was a problem of elderly people, but not of young people. And young people in Tel Aviv continued going out to bars and restaurants and clubs. In some sectors in Israeli society, it was extremely difficult to negotiate even the option of following the rules, especially in the ultra-Orthodox community in Bnei Brak and in Jerusalem, in Mea Shearim, and in the Arab sector as well. There was a lot of hesitation, reluctance, but gradually there was a better understanding and willingness to do what was necessary, to do what was right. And I do believe that eventually that would help the government to somehow to limit the number of patients and those who unfortunately died because of the coronavirus pandemic. Having said that, I have my own hesitations as a parent about sending children back to the education system. There are already reported cases of teachers were diagnosed with the coronavirus pandemic after studies in Israel were renewed, and the teachers and all the children in the class were sent to to quarantine with their families again. Any case like that influences, it's like a wave that influences dozens of people. I don't know what the easy solution is. There is always the tension between public health on one hand and the economic situation on the other. And with the economic crisis looming, of course, there is a lot of pressure from business owners, from employees, to return to normal as soon as possible. And of course, there are implications. So we're taking it step by step, very cautiously, and I hope we won't regret it. There are a lot of discussions about the second wave, and we have to prepare for the second wave of coronavirus. We'll see.
Thank you. I know that a lot of people here in Canada and around the world are asking what's going to be for our Yom Tov, what's going to be for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. I noticed today that Israel, the government, dealt with the Orthodox community, that they want to gather in large groups. They're allowing 50 people to gather together in synagogues, and everybody's mandatory to wear a mask. How do you feel the government is dealing with the Orthodox community?
This is a very interesting question because it's a sector that is growing in importance in Israel, growing in number and growing in importance. And I'm talking about the ultra-Orthodox community. Not all of it. I'm talking about mainly the isolated Hasidic courts. Many of them don't follow the news, or they get news about what is happening in Israel through very filtered channels. And I believe that there is a growing realization now in that particular sector that they need to be better connected to the state. Many of them, for example, at first didn't realize what was going on. They didn't realize the severity of the situation, and that's the hesitation to follow the rules and the refusal. Sometimes we witnessed riots, even riots in some of the cities in Jerusalem and in Bnei Brak, and that had to be dealt with by the police and even by military units, by the IDF. I believe that knowledge is power, and we see that ultra-Orthodox communities today, after 2 months only of the coronavirus pandemic, are better connected. They understand and they realize what they should do and how they should continue. Still, every now and then we have, isolated cases that the Israeli police have to deal with. But otherwise, I think it contributes. It actually contributes to the better involvement of the ultra-Orthodox community, the connection between these isolated communities and the general Israeli public.
Great. You touched on it earlier, Galit. You mentioned it. I'm just wondering if you can further expand. You said that Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu finally established a broad new government. So I'm just curious to know, what does it promise for Israel? Does it really reflect renewed unity?
Well, the road that led to this unity government was long, and the process was painful. Many negotiations for weeks and weeks, and while the Israeli public waited in this situation of coronavirus pandemic, world pandemic, there are many ministers. It's a very big government. We're talking about 36 ministers and 14 deputy ministers. I believe this is the largest Israeli government ever, and the expenses are enormous. And in times like that, when we have to deal with the coronavirus pandemic and its economic implications, and of course, it's difficult for the Israeli public to see that. The expectation is that the government will make sure that the governmental ministries will function and function well in order to lead Israel out of this crisis. It's not going to be easy. It's a government that will have to negotiate every single step, every single decision. But what we see here now is the beginning of a process of more stability and more cooperation in the political sphere in Israel, and we all need that. So it's a process, and we're taking our first steps, but the beginning is actually very promising. This is very good to see that.
Thank you. That's wonderful to hear that. I'm curious to know, I know that Canada and Israel for many, many years have had a very, very strong relationship. And I'm just wondering, in a time like this, in a time of crisis, do you find yourselves working together more, whether it's research, whether it's information sharing? Can you share a little bit more about the relationship that we have with Canada?
Oh, yes. Canada and Israel are very, I would say, very close in the international community, allies, friends. We cooperate on many levels when it comes to Canada. I'll tell you a little bit about the activity that we've done here, Israeli diplomats. Part of our job is to gather information and to learn about what other governments do, especially in a situation of a global crisis. It's very important to compare notes. Governments actually do that. How to adopt the proper exit strategy, what measures to adopt, how to support businesses, how should the hospitals function in a situation like that, how to protect medical teams, and so on. So in order to do that, we study, diplomats, Israeli diplomats who serve in Canada, we learn what Canada is doing here, and we provide information about it back home. In Israel, while Canadian diplomats serving in Israel do pretty much the same. This is how diplomats provide information around the world in order to make this battle against the coronavirus more efficient. This is one aspect. When it comes to travel, for example, travel restrictions, our activity here was vital. And I have to tell you that we discussed every single case of Israeli backpackers who were stranded and people who wanted to return to Israel, with flights that were canceled, with airports that were closed and shut, borders that were shut. And we feel that here, when it comes to Canada, when it comes to Canadian officials, that there is so much willingness to help, so much willingness to cooperate and support Israelis and Israeli diplomats in particular, foreign diplomats in general, when it comes to this situation. There is a sense that we have to join hands and we have to work together. In addition, I would like to mention and compliment the Canadian government for everything that it does in a very positive manner for stability in the region, for supporting initiatives in the Middle East. And not enough is said about the Canadian involvement that is always very gentle, very positive and very supportive. But I believe that Canadians need to hear that about the positive contribution of Canada to the situation in the Middle East and to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in building bridges and in bringing people together. So we continue working with the Canadian government. We continue working with Canadian officials. One reflection was that video clip that I mentioned, with so many warm words and congratulations to Israel, that I was overwhelmed. It was a great compliment, a tribute to Israeli-Canadian relations. And I really encourage people to go and check on our website and our social media channels and watch this video clip. It's really heartwarming.
Thank you. Galit, I'm curious to know, do you think that we've seen a rise in anti-Semitism during this pandemic?
Definitely yes. Definitely yes. It disappoints me to say that. We see the rise of, I would say, the classic blood libels from the Middle Ages of the Jews who spread the virus, spread the disease. There were some statements that were made, remarks by not only by elected, not necessarily elected officials, but actors or musicians or social activists of all sorts. I read some myself, and I was amazed to see that in the 21st century we still have to deal with this. But yes, there were accusations that were made and are still being made against Israel when it comes to Israel, not only Jews around the world, but Israel in particular, when it comes to the coronavirus crisis in the Palestinian Authority, for example. And many of the accusations are absolutely baseless. We will have to deal with it, and the best way to deal with it is by providing information, by providing evidence, but it's very disappointing to see it. And there was recently a report that was, if I'm not mistaken, that was published by B'nai Brit, and I encourage people to read it, about the rising number of anti-Semitic cases and manifestations of anti-Semitism in North America, in the United States, in Canada. There are other organizations that report about it regularly. What I do see is that the Jewish community here is organized and deals with it very well. When it comes to direct accusations against Israel, then the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs is involved in leading the battle against these accusations in the international arena, in international organizations of all sorts.
Thank you. Galit, I'm curious to know, we as Canadians here, what can we be doing to support Israel during this time and on an ongoing basis?
Well, what I can say is, first of all, support the Jewish community here. And I know that federations here in Canada are extremely worried about the situation here when it comes to Jewish schools, education, camps, different organizations that are under the umbrella of the different federations do what is needed in order to support the Jewish community in Canada. This is the most important thing. We are grateful to everything that is done in support of Israel, and I do hope that soon, once direct flights are renewed, Canadian students who study in Israel will be able to return to Israel. People again will be able to attend weddings and events, family events, and go to Israel for tourism. We would like to see the tourism sector being revived. The situation now is dire. It's very sad to see that, because last year Israel hosted a record number of tourists from all over the world, 4.5 million people from all over the world. The situation now is desperate. Hotels are empty. Hopefully, with the renewal of direct flights, things will be renewed in Israel as well. So keep us in mind. And if you're looking for a tourist destination, come to Israel and visit us.
So I have a follow-up question. It's a very important question to a lot of families. Some of our children have plans, summer programs to spend time in Israel. I'm just wondering, they've told us that we have to wait until June the 1st to let us know whether or not these programs will be running. So I'm just wondering your thoughts about the possibility of these programs actually taking place.
Well, when it comes to entering Israel, we, for the time being, and according to the regulations that are imposed now in Israel, we allow only Israeli citizens. Unfortunately, we have to reject many of the applications that we receive at the consulate. And all the stories are very moving, very touching. People want to go to Israel, and they have very good reasons to do so. But for the time being, according to the regulations in Israel, I have no good news, and all of us will have to wait until a decision is made back home in Israel.
And somebody like myself and Shoshana, who obviously have our family 10,000 miles away, and you have your family a little bit closer, but also very far away. What have you been doing to keep in touch with your family? How have you been keeping in touch? I know it's difficult to know that we can't go and visit our families, but how have you been handling that situation?
Well, the interesting thing is, as a diplomat, that my husband and I are used to it in a way, in maintaining relations with our families long distance, but it's not easy. For example, trying to celebrate Passover on Zoom, there were many Israeli families that actually did that. And my friends testified that they managed to actually read the entire Haggadah on Zoom with their families in Israel, and even in Israel, in different houses and around the table. They pretty much decorated the table in the same manner, and even agreed in advance on the same menu. That was, I thought it was impressive. We tried to do that with my family, with my brothers and their family and my parents. And there was a very awkward silence for a couple of minutes. It didn't work for us. I don't know what the solution is, but WhatsApp, all the social media tools are very efficient to maintain contacts, at least on a daily basis. I'm not sure about the seder. I'm not sure about celebrations, but at least to see each other and to talk every now and then. I think this is very important. What I am personally worried about is my parents. Were isolated in Israel for a very long time. My father is a doctor, and at a certain point he decided to go back to work in the hospital, in Poria Hospital in the north. There was a shortage of doctors, and doctors in Israel worked in very long shifts because of the coronavirus pandemic. And even though he is considered to be in a risk group, he decided to go back to work. And this is, the doctors take an oath, physicians take an oath to do whatever is necessary to save lives. And we couldn't say anything about it, even though we were extremely worried about him. But that's the way it is, not only with my family, but with many other families.
Well, I wish only your family should have a lot of health, and just they should all be safe. Before we close, I feel close enough to you. We have a relationship that I want to ask you one or two personal questions and get a lighter side of you. The first one is, I want to know, what have you been doing personally? What have you and your husband and your children been doing during this lockdown?
The fun thing that is every evening we choose a television series and we watch it together on Netflix. We're not the only family that watches television, I guess, every night. I have to tell you that usually my husband and I are so busy that we hardly spend any time with our own children. And in a way, the coronavirus pandemic created an opportunity for us to watch TV, to spend time together, to eat dinner together, and it's wonderful. It's a gift. It's a gift because it reminds us what is really important in life. So we've been watching an Israeli television series. What's the name of it? When Heroes Fly. We watched it together, and now tonight we'll start watching Shtisel again, the first season, because it's so wonderful.
So talking about Netflix, that was my next question. I wanted to know whether you've watched the third season of Falda.
No, not yet, not yet. The kids are encouraging us to do it. My son is about to join the army next year, so we pay attention now to television series that have to do with military service because he needs to know what's coming. So any program about basic training, about boot camp, this is what we watch these days. And Fauda will keep the third season for maybe a later time, not immediately, one step at a time.
Okay, well, if you're going to take it from anybody, I have to tell you it's a must watch, an absolute must watch. But Galit, really, we want to wish you, we want to wish your family, Briot, everybody should be healthy. And we wish you all the best. And to our congregants, we want to thank everybody so much for joining us tonight. And again, we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Ma'alev shelanu, we just want to say toda rabba lach. And it's so nice to see you. And to everybody, we hope that everybody stays safe, stays healthy, stays at home. And please God, we look forward to all being together at the Adith Israel, in our congregation together, and we hope that, please God, you'll come back and visit us in our congregation. So toda rabba to everybody. And to finish, we say thank you. And I want to remind everybody of our future speaker programs that we have coming up, to look in our achshav and all of our emails being sent out by our congregation. Especially on May 31st, we have Gilbert Sharp, a lawyer, author, and professor, who will be talking about mental health and mental health law in Ontario. And again, Galit, toda rabba lach. And we want to wish everybody Laila Tov and Am Yisrael Chai.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Laila Tov.